Mysterio, master of illusions, was on the ground with his helmet cracked as he thought to himself that all this wasn't supposed to happen. He was done. He quit being a villain. So why was Spider-Man in a menacing new costume slinking towards him, telling him to get up? Come on, get up. Get to your feet. I'm not gonna punch a man who's just lying there. Spider-Man then said that he'd be taking the criminal to jail, promising to have him stuck in a cell so buried that it would come with a free tombstone. For Mysterio, that could not happen. He refused to go back to prison. You think I'm through with you? I'm just getting warmed. Oh, crap. Spider-Man interrupted him with a shot of his webs. Yeah! Spider-Man then flung Mysterio across the room and into a bunch of furniture. Yeah, Mysterio was in some real pain after that one. From there, he'd hit us with a "you're probably wondering how I got here" bit of context. This is gonna be the biggest heist ever, Johnny. I almost wish you weren't some straight scientist. I'd love to have you backing me up. Sorry, Quentin. I just don't spin that way. Mysterio was meeting with an old friend in a bar out of costume. Right. Sure you don't. Johnny wondered what that meant. Quentin shot back that Johnny worked for the Kingpin. The freaking Kingpin! His buddy would correct him by saying Wilson Fisk. Right, and my name is Quentin Beck, but that's not the name that strikes fear into people's hearts. His friend chuckled at the idea of Mysterio ever striking fear in the hearts of anyone, which prompted Quentin to knock him upside the head. Quentin told him that he's not the same guy that roomed with him back at MIT. He was a supervillain now, so it was important to be respectful. Johnny remained unconvinced, while Quentin made it clear that he was serious. Johnny then mocked him for losing to Spider-Man every time they fought, which Quentin chalked up to a series of flukes and bad luck. But things got really disrespectful when Johnny said that the Power Pack, a group of kid superheroes from the 80s that included a preschooler, could probably beat him too. Quentin claimed that to be completely ridiculous, but technically, he did lose to them eventually. Johnny joked that he might need to work his way up from the Muppet Babies. From there, he'd ask if Mysterio had ever even killed someone before, asking if his old friend had blood on his hands. Quentin wondered why Johnny would ask something like that. The goon would then tell him that Fisk had. The Kingpin was an actual supervillain with a total disregard for human life. With that, Quentin claimed that, of course, he'd killed before. Johnny asked how many, but Quentin said he'd lost count. But Johnny knew Quentin was lying. Changing the subject, Quentin told him about the SunTrust Bank on Madison and 53rd. Apparently, there was a rising independent movie studio that was making a lot of money lately. One of their silent partners invests in bearer bonds. They were in the bank's vault, just waiting to be stolen. Johnny wasn't really impressed. Bank robbing was kinda B tier on the villainy scale. Raising his glass, Quentin said that with the money from this one job, he'd have enough to buy his own vacation island in the Caribbean. It would be enough to make him a major player in the city. He wouldn't have to worry about killing Spider-Man since he could just hire people to do that for him. But Johnny still wasn't interested and would wish his pal good luck. Clinking their glasses, Quentin said that he makes his own luck. On the phone with her husband, a bank teller wondered if she'd been sent a gift by him. When he said he wasn't the one to leave a box on her desk, she apologized for bothering him. Then she'd tell him to pick up their daughter Grace from school, expecting to get back home around the same time as usual. Dubiously opening the box, the woman was confused by what she saw. A gas mask and a note that read, "Put this on." Just then, she cried out as she saw everyone in the building fall to the ground as green smoke spread all around. Rushing to put the mask on, the voice of Mysterio would boom out, telling the woman to do exactly as he told her. She immediately began begging him not to hurt her, telling him that she has a husband and a little girl at home. But Mysterio proclaimed that so long as she obeyed his orders, she would not be harmed. First demanding that she open the vault, and quickly. She asked him who he was, and he confidently told her he was her worst nightmare. You're me taking a test I didn't study for, and I'm naked? Mysterio just stood there for a while. Just open the damn vault. And once she opened it up, Mysterio was very happy. He wondered how he'd get them all out, but before he could respond, freeze! Unluckily for Mysterio, the bank's security guard was in the bathroom when the villain first showed up. And now he was aiming his pistol, demanding to see Mysterio's hands over his dome head. Make me. Mysterio knocked the guard out, but then he'd hear from the woman behind him. She'd been shot. I don't feel good. As they wheeled her body out, a cop would ask another if they had any idea who tried to rob the bank. Apparently, there was too much mist for the security cameras to give them anything useful. Sitting in an alleyway, Mysterio threw and broke his helmet as he was hit with waves of remorse. Sometime later, Spider-Man in his symbiote suit was busy dealing with a would-be art thief on a roof. The villain promised to let the hero live if he gave the painting back, but Spider-Man wasn't sure he had much credibility in the letting people live department. As he reached the edge of the roof, Spider-Man knew that he was in for one hell of a jump. As he leapt between the Twin Towers of New York City, Spider-Man really wished he had a tightrope, which was a reference to the 1974 event that saw 18-year-old performer Philippe Petit do exactly that. After the crazy impressive 130-foot jump, Spider-Man mockingly thought about how he'd love to see the Toda, Kangaroo, or Batroc match that, joking that it was the job of a hero to keep the bad guys hopping. A bit strangely, Spider-Man was making himself laugh despite keeping all of this inside his head. He even thought about doing a one-man Broadway show, but quickly dismissed it because nobody would ever want to see Spider-Man on Broadway. A reference to Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark, one of the most dangerous and disastrous shows in Broadway history. Spider-Man narrowly evaded the villain's corrosive spittle. He'd planned this art theft very thoroughly and refused to let Spider-Man ruin it. A once-in-a-lifetime special exhibit. Guards everywhere, but they couldn't stop. Death? Taxes? The beat? The human fly! Darn it! That was my 47th guess. Okay, my turn. I'm thinking of a vegetable, but the human fly was done playing games and immediately rushed towards Spider-Man, who dodged out of the way as the fly hit into the roof. Spider-Man didn't want to embarrass the guy, but claimed his fly was open. Tired of all the jokes, the fly shot out again with his corrosive spit. Spider-Man had to admit that that was a pretty neat trick, but his webs were cool too, as he shot them out, immediately covering the fly's entire face. Struggling to tear it off, the fly called Spider-Man an idiot for thinking that would be enough to stop him. But as he pulled it off, Spider-Man corrected him. He was pretty sure something else would stop the perp. The fly began to yell out in horror before the huge metal beam he'd melted broke off and flattened him. All Spider-Man needed was a really big fly swatter to win. But now, with all that handled, he had to wonder what sort of artwork the fly wanted this badly. And as he lifted the iconic Scream painting, he completely understood it to be the story of his life. Sometime later, J. Jonah Jameson was on the TV, impressed by Spider-Man's saving of the Scream, considering he also knocked out a bunch of local networks in the process. From there, he'd move on to the fact that the Avengers remained silent about Spider-Man's involvement in their secret war, believing that they were clearly just covering for him. He could only imagine what Spider-Man was up to now. And as he wondered what evil thoughts were winding through the web-slinger's head, we'd see Peter sleeping in bed with his suit over a nearby chair. Peter woke up confused by some sudden banging, only to realize it was his landlord looking for the rent. He assured her that he'd definitely have it tomorrow. Just then, though, he'd hear another voice, wondering why he put up with such a lady to begin with. Emerging from the window, the blonde-headed woman wondered why he didn't just have Spider-Man web her upside down somewhere. Then maybe she wouldn't be so snarky. Peter was shocked to see the black cat outside of her costume. She admitted that since it's dirty, and he's always worried that Black Cat showing up at his apartment might blow his secret identity, she decided to try something new. Peter wondered what would happen if people saw her climbing in, but Felicia said they just think she's a crazy blonde. From there, Peter would level with her, saying that it wasn't exactly the best day for them to meet. He needed to go somewhere. She insisted on following along, but he refused. To this, Felicia would point at him, saying how he's always so angry about her not caring about his whole Peter Parker thing. That she's in love with Spider-Man and not whatever this was. So, she thought that she might try spending a day with Peter to see his point of view. Finally convinced, Peter agreed, telling her to just let him get dressed first. Leaning in, she wondered if he might want to get undressed instead. But as the black suit began to slink towards him, he told her maybe later. Felicia's mind was blown by this. She wondered where his web shooters were, but Peter proudly told her that the costume creates its own webbing, which she found to be both amazing and really creepy. As it clung to his body, Felicia wondered what the hell it was, even asking if the thing was alive. Now completely dressed by the suit, Peter laughed while telling her that that wasn't the case. He'd gotten it on Battleworld. A machine just repaired his costume with this alien cloth. After hearing that it's cloth that reads Peter's mind, Felicia was even more convinced that the thing was alive, but Peter was adamant about it just being alien technology. Felicia would reluctantly agree that it was in fact alien technology, much to Peter's satisfaction, before adding in that it was also definitely alive. Tired of the back and forth, the two left the apartment, and Felicia wasn't really happy to be going to a cemetery. She wondered who Benjamin Parker was, before suddenly realizing. Peter would then explain to her that this was his Uncle Ben, that today was the anniversary of the day he died to a burglar that Spider-Man let escape, telling her that the Spider-Man she loves wouldn't exist without him. Now holding his hand, Felicia would apologize to Peter. Peter wanted her to see it, to understand him a bit, to get why he was the way he was, and maybe make Peter Parker less problematic. But before he could complete his sentence, he'd noticed something that shook him. It was Quentin Beck, Mysterio, and he was looking right at him. Panicked, Peter came to the conclusion that Mysterio must have figured out his secret identity. Felicia wondered how that was possible. Peter wasn't sure, but he knew he needed to find out. Mysterio was gone, but Peter knew he couldn't have gone very far. Felicia offered to go with him, but because she didn't have her costume, he told her to just grab a cab and go home, much to her displeasure. Throwing her hands up and saying his name aloud, Felicia grabbed the attention of another person. With some flowers in her hand, Aunt May wondered if Felicia was talking about her nephew. Nearby, we'd have the gravesite of Audrey Henning, beloved wife and mother, as Quentin stood over it, claiming that this wasn't supposed to happen, that it should have been a simple job. Now stopped, he said that no one was supposed to die, that he didn't want anyone to die. He finally admitted that Johnny was right. He wasn't a supervillain. It was all pretend. He was no different from one of his tricks. He'd made up his mind. He was quitting and refused to let anyone else die because of him. He'd let someone else be the one to take out Spider-Man. He was through, and nobody would miss him. Looking over his shoulder, Quentin wondered if he was seeing Audrey. But in reality, it was just Felicia, who had the same hair as she stood with Peter. With that, he decided to leave, not wanting to start any trouble. Back in his lair, Mysterio continued to think about retirement, wondering if maybe he should record a short film renouncing Mysterio, renouncing violence once and for all. Because this had been his life for so many years, he knew it would be hard to just leave it all behind. But thinking of the poor woman that died because of him was enough of a reason to stop altogether. He wondered if maybe he should start his own special effects company. He figured he'd be able to show them how to do practical effects right. But before he could finish that train of thought, he saw Spider-Man over his shoulder. And just as quickly, his head was slammed into the mirror in front of him. As he attacked Mysterio, Spider-Man wondered why his spider sense wasn't going off. Convincing himself that Mysterio was a danger, Spider-Man kicked Mysterio in the face while assuming it to be some kind of trick. After all, Mysterio had found ways to smother his spider sense in the past. As Mysterio tumbled into several boxes, Spider-Man refused to be fooled again. He just kept beating Mysterio over and over, again and again. That gravestone you were visiting, I checked. It was a woman killed in a bank robbery. You did it, didn't you? Stammering, Mysterio swore that it wasn't him before wondering how Spider-Man even knew he was at the cemetery. Because I find things out! But I didn't admit it! Mysterio desperately tried to think of something. It was my sister, okay? Excuse the hell out of me for mourning my sister! Spider-Man let him go. God, I'm sorry. No. Not yet, you aren't. He raised a button. But you will be. A massive explosion began to fill the building with flames. Oh, crap. I'd leave if I were you, Spider-Man. Spider-Man had 10 seconds before the entire place was blown to bits. Mysterio counted down for him. Rushing away, Spider-Man leapt toward the glass window only to slam into a brick wall. It was a fake window. Spider-Man really couldn't stand dealing with Mysterio. There were only 2 seconds left, as with the last one, Spider-Man rammed his way straight through the building before the entire place went up in flames. Flashing back to earlier that day at the cemetery, Aunt May told Felicia that she could be honest about not just being Peter's friend. Felicia would begin to admit that she was Peter's lover before correcting to say his girlfriend. You can say lover, dear. I'm old, not dead. She asked if Peter listens to her. Felicia admitted that he did, sometimes, but it depends. Aunt May, afraid that Peter might be wasting his life, would tell her to convince Peter to go back to college. Felicia would guide Aunt May to a taxi before kissing her on the forehead and sending her off. Back near the warehouse, fire trucks were speeding along to put out the blaze, sirens blaring. As Spider-Man pulled himself away from some dumpsters, he thought about how much he'd screwed up, feeling really bad about the whole sister thing. It was no wonder his spider sense wasn't tingling. Mysterio wasn't a threat, he was mourning just like Peter was. Mysterio was a criminal, but he was still a person. His head spinning, Spider-Man knew he wasn't in the best shape to web swing away. But since he couldn't have Spider-Man seen staggering away, he had the suit shift to a different look. Mysterio, who was watching nearby, was horrified to see this change. There was clearly much more to Spider-Man's new costume than anyone knew. Believing this to be a whole new ballgame, Mysterio vowed to find out what was going on. And next time, he'll be teaming up with a mysterious new foe. For more epic Spider-Man mistakes, check out our list of the worst things he's ever done.